What do you do when your happiest moment becomes your worst nightmare? I never thought that the happiest day of my life would also become the day that shattered everything I thought I knew about my own past, but sometimes the mind has ways of protecting us from trauma that we don't even realize until something forces those buried memories back to the surface. My name is Alex, and 3 months ago, my girlfriend Sarah and I got engaged. It was perfect. A sunset proposal on the beach where we had our first date with a ring I'd been saving for over a year. Sarah said yes. We cried happy tears, and I felt like my life was finally falling into place. I was 26 years old, had a good job, a woman I loved more than anything, and we were ready to start building our future together. The first people I wanted to tell were my family. I called my dad, Robert, that same evening, my voice still shaking with excitement. "Dad, I have incredible news," I told him. "Sarah and I got engaged today." There was a pause, and then I heard him calling to my stepmother, "Linda, Linda, come here. Alex got engaged." I could hear her in the background, and then my dad put the phone on speaker. "Congratulations, Alex," my dad said, but his tone was flat, almost disinterested. "When's the wedding?" "We haven't set a date yet, but probably next spring." We wanted to tell family first before we start planning. That's when Linda spoke up, and her words hit me like a physical blow. "Well, I hope Sarah knows what she's getting herself into," she said with that familiar condescending tone I remembered from somewhere deep in my mind. Alex was always such a difficult child. Sarah's going to have her hands full dealing with all of his ... issues. I felt my chest tighten. "What do you mean, Linda?" "Oh, you know," she continued, her voice getting sharper. "All that drama and attention-seeking behavior. The tantrums, the lies, the way you used to make up stories to get your father's attention. I spent years trying to help your father deal with your problems, but you were just impossible. Some people never really change, do they?" My dad said nothing. Nothing at all. I stood there in my apartment, holding the phone, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. These weren't the congratulations I'd expected. These weren't the words of a loving stepmother who'd raised me since I was -1 years old. These were the words of someone who had never seen me as anything more than a burden, a problem to be managed, but it was more than that. As Linda spoke, something started breaking loose in my mind, fragments of memories I couldn't quite grasp, feelings of fear and confusion that seemed to come from nowhere. "Linda," I started, but she cut me off. "I'm just being honest, Alex. Marriage is hard enough without going in blind. Sarah deserves to know what kind of family she's marrying into. Your father and I have dealt with enough of your issues over the years." Again, my father said nothing. He didn't defend me, didn't correct her, didn't even seem uncomfortable with what she was saying. He just let her speak as if her words were perfectly reasonable. I ended the call quickly, making some excuse about having to go. But after I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Not just with their reaction, but with my own memory. Why couldn't I clearly remember my childhood with Linda? Why did her voice trigger such a deep sense of dread? That night, I couldn't sleep. Sarah noticed I was upset and asked what was wrong. I told her about the call, about Linda's comments, but I couldn't explain the deeper feeling of unease that was growing inside me. "She sounds awful," Sarah said, holding me close. "What kind of person says that to someone who just got engaged?" "I don't know," I replied. "But there's something else, I feel like. I feel like there's something I'm not remembering about my childhood. Something important." Sarah looked concerned. "What do you mean? It's hard to explain." But when Linda was talking, it felt familiar. Not just her being mean now, but like she'd said things like that before. Many times before, but I can't remember clearly. Over the next few days, I found myself thinking more and more about my childhood. I realized that most of my memories from ages 8 to 18, the years Linda was in my life, were surprisingly vague. I could remember some big events like birthdays and holidays, but the day-to-day life felt like it was wrapped in fog. I started having dreams. Disturbing dreams where I was a child again, sitting at a dinner table while someone yelled at me for eating too loudly, or standing in a corner while harsh words rained down on me like blows. In these dreams, I could never see faces clearly, but I could hear voices, Linda's voice saying terrible things, and my father's voice saying nothing at all. A week after the engagement call, I decided to reach out to my older sister, Maya. She was my dad's daughter from his first marriage and had moved out when she turned 18, right around the time Linda came into our lives. We'd maintained a decent relationship over the years, but we rarely talked about our childhood or family. Maya, I said when she answered my call, can I ask you something about when we were kids? Sure. What's up? Do you remember much about Linda when she first started living with us? There was a long pause. Why are you asking about that now? I told her about my engagement, about Linda's reaction, and about the strange feeling that I was missing important memories. Maya was quiet. For so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, she spoke, and her voice was different, tighter, sadder. Alex, I've been wondering for years when you were going to remember. Remember what? How bad it was, how bad she was to you. My heart started racing. What do you mean, Alex? Linda was horrible to you. From the day she moved in, she treated you like you were some kind of burden she had to tolerate. She would criticize everything you did, the way you ate, the way you walked, the way you breathed. She called you names, told you that you were worthless, that no one would ever love you. As Maya spoke, images started flashing in my mind. A woman standing over me as I sat at the kitchen table, telling me I was disgusting for spilling milk. The same woman telling me I was stupid for not understanding my math homework. Her voice saying I was the reason my mother left, that I drove everyone away, but Dad ... I started. Dad did nothing, Maya said, her voice breaking. I tried to tell him what was happening, but he was so infatuated with Linda, so desperate to make the marriage work, that he chose her over you. Every single time, more memories came flooding back. My father's face turned away as Linda berated me for some minor mistake. His silence when she would send me to my room without dinner. The way he would leave the house when her anger got particularly vicious, abandoning me to deal with her rage. Alone, I tried to protect you when I could, Maya continued, but I was just a teenager myself, and I was planning to leave for college. I felt so guilty leaving you there with her, but I couldn't take it anymore. I thought ... I hoped things would get better. Why don't I remember most of this clearly? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer because it was too much, Maya said gently. You were just a little kid. Your mind protected you the only way it could, by pushing those memories down so deep that you could function, but Alex, it was bad. Really bad. As we talked, more pieces started falling into place. I remembered now how I used to hide in my room for hours, how I learned to be invisible in my own house. I remembered the constant walking on eggshells, never knowing what would set Linda off. I remembered the names she called me: worthless, stupid, burden, mistake, and I remembered my father's silence. His complete and utter failure to protect his own child. There's something else, Maya said hesitantly. The reason I moved out so quickly when I turned 18... It wasn't just because I wanted independence. I couldn't stand watching what was happening to you and feeling powerless to stop it. But I also knew that if I spoke up too much, Dad would choose Linda over both of us. He chose her over me anyway, I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Yeah, Maya whispered. He did. After that call, the floodgates opened completely. Over the next several days, memories came back in waves. I remembered Linda telling me that my mother left because I was too difficult to love. I remembered her saying that I was lucky my father kept me around because no one else would want such a problematic child. I remembered her punishing me for things I didn't do. making me write lines saying I will not be a burden to my family hundreds of times. I remembered my father walking into the room during some of these incidents and simply walking back out. I remembered trying to tell him what was happening, only to have him dismiss my concerns with phrases like "Linda's just trying to help you become a better person," or "you need to try harder to get along with her." Most painfully, I remembered the gradual way I learned to stop expecting protection from my father. How I learned that his love came with conditions, and one of those conditions was accepting Linda's treatment without complaint. The psychological abuse had been systematic and devastating. Linda had spent a decade convincing me that I was fundamentally flawed, unlovable, and burdensome. And my father had allowed it to happen because it was easier than confronting his wife. Sarah noticed the change in me immediately. I was having trouble sleeping, eating, concentrating at work. The joy of our engagement felt tainted by these returning memories. "Talk to me," she said one evening, finding me staring out the window. "What's happening in your head?" I told her everything. About the memories returning, about what Maya had told me, about the years of abuse I'd somehow managed to forget. Sarah listened with tears in her eyes, holding my hand tightly. "I'm so sorry," she said when I finished. "I'm so sorry that happened to you, and I'm sorry that your father failed you so completely. The worst part," I said, "is that they're still together. They're still married, still presenting themselves as this happy couple." And when I called with the best news of my life, Linda's first instinct was to tear me down, just like she always did. "Nothing has changed. What do you want to do?" Sarah asked. That was the question, wasn't it? What do you do when you realize that your father chose his wife's comfort over his child's well-being? What do you do when you understand that the people who were supposed to love and protect you were actually the source of your deepest wounds? I spent weeks in therapy, working through these recovered memories with a professional. My therapist helped me understand that childhood trauma often gets buried as a survival mechanism, but it doesn't disappear. It influences how we see ourselves and the world, even when we can't consciously remember why. She also helped me understand that my father's failure to protect me was its own form of abuse. That his silence in the face of Linda's cruelty was a choice, and it was the wrong choice every single time. "You were a child," she reminded me. "It was never your responsibility to fix the situation or make it easier for the adults. It was their responsibility to protect you, and they failed." I decided to write a letter to my father, not to send immediately, but to get my thoughts and feelings out. In that letter, I detailed what I remembered, how his inaction had affected me, and how Linda's reaction to my engagement had triggered all of these buried memories. I wrote about the child I was, sensitive, eager to please, desperately wanting his father's love and approval. I wrote about how Linda's abuse had taught me to believe I was fundamentally unworthy of love, and how his silence had confirmed that belief. I wrote about the adult I became, someone who struggled with self-worth, who was always waiting for people to leave, who had learned to make himself small and invisible to avoid conflict. And I wrote about Sarah, about how her unconditional love had been slowly healing wounds I didn't even know I had, until Linda's words ripped them open again. After several drafts, I decided to send the letter. Not because I expected an apology or acknowledgement. The therapy had helped me understand that I might never get those things, but because I needed my father to know that I remembered, that his choices had consequences, that his silence had spoken volumes. His response came 2 weeks later. It was shorter than I'd hoped and more defensive than I'd feared. "Alex," it read, "I'm sorry you feel that way about your childhood. Linda and I did our best with a difficult situation. You were a challenging child, and we were trying to help you learn how to behave appropriately. I think you're remembering things in a more negative light than they actually were. Maybe you should focus on your future with Sarah instead of dwelling on the past." There it was, no acknowledgement of the abuse. No apology for failing to protect me, no recognition that a grown woman systematically tearing down a child's self-worth was wrong. Regardless of how challenging that child might have been, just more of the same minimizing, dismissing, and blame shifting that had characterized his parenting all along. I shared the letter with Sarah, with Maya, and with my therapist. They all had the same reaction. This was exactly what they'd expected from someone who had spent years enabling abuse. He's not going to change, my therapist said. People who could watch their child being emotionally destroyed and do nothing aren't suddenly going to develop insight or accountability decades later. She was right. But somehow seeing his response in black and white was actually helpful. It confirmed that my memories were accurate, that my feelings were valid, and that expecting different behavior from him now would only lead to more disappointment. Sarah and I decided to move forward with our wedding planning without involving my father and Linda. It was painful, but it was also liberating. We sent them a formal invitation, but we made it clear that any negative comments or behavior would result in them being asked to leave. My father called after receiving the invitation. "Alex, don't you think you're being a bit dramatic about all this?" he said. "Linda feels terrible that you misunderstood her comments about your engagement." "I didn't misunderstand anything, Dad," I replied, "and this isn't about one phone call. This is about 18 years of emotional abuse that you allowed to happen. That's not how I remember it," he said. "That's the problem," I said. "You don't remember it because you weren't paying attention. You were too busy keeping Linda happy to notice what she was doing to your son." The conversation ended there. He hasn't called since. The wedding is in 2 months. Maya will be there, along with Sarah's wonderful family and the friends who've become my chosen family over the years. My father and Linda received their invitation, but they haven't responded. Part of me hopes they don't come. Part of me hopes they do, so they can see the man I've become despite their failure to nurture or protect me. But mostly, I'm trying to focus on the future Sarah and I are building together. The engagement that triggered this entire revelation has actually become more meaningful, not less. Sarah has seen me at my most vulnerable, has held me through the worst of these recovered memories, and has never once made me feel like I was too much or too damaged. She's shown me what real love looks like: patient, supportive, and protective. I'm sharing this story because I know there are others out there who have gaps in their childhood memories, who have that nagging feeling that something isn't quite right about their past. Sometimes our minds protect us from trauma by hiding it, but those buried experiences still affect us in ways we might not understand. If my story resonates with you, please consider talking to a therapist. There are professionals who specialize in recovered memory and childhood trauma, and they can help you navigate whatever you might discover about your own past. And if you're someone who has clear memories of childhood abuse, please know that you're not alone. The adults who failed to protect you made choices that weren't your fault. You deserved better then, and you deserve healing now. Most importantly, remember that the family you're born into doesn't have to define your entire life. You can choose to surround yourself with people who truly love and support you. You can break cycles of abuse and create healthier relationships. My father chose Linda over me again and again for 18 years, but I'm choosing differently. I'm choosing Sarah, I'm choosing therapy, I'm choosing to remember and heal rather than forget and repeat. It's not always easy, but it's worth it. Because the happiest moment of my life, getting engaged to the woman I love, shouldn't have to compete with the worst memories of my childhood. And thanks to the work I'm doing now, someday it won't have to. Thank you for listening to my story. Have you ever had buried memories surface unexpectedly? How did you handle family members who failed to protect you as a child? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments.